Welcome to Free Media. I'm Robby Soave.
And I'm Amber Duke. A gunman attacked two Minnesota congressmen at their respective homes, killing State Rep Melissa Hortman and her husband. The shocking murder has drawn widespread condemnation, and a suspect, Vance Bolter, is now in custody.
Republican Senator Mike Lee's tweets about the suspect have been criticized, however. Lee tweeted a photo of this alleged killer with the headline, "Nightmare on Walz Street," an apparent reference to the state's Democratic governor, Tim Walz. Here was Minnesota Senator Tina Smith calling out Mike Lee on CNN.
Most people have been saying exactly that, raising those questions. Everyone has been horrified by this, as you and I both are. But your colleague in the Senate, Republican Mike Lee of Utah, in the aftermath of this attack, he posted two things. One, he said, quote, "This is what happens when Marxists don't get their way." And then in an apparent reference to the governor, Tim Walz, he wrote, "Nightmare on Walz Street." You were seen talking to Senator Lee on Capitol Hill earlier. What did you say to him?
Well, I wanted Senator Lee, who, I mean, honestly, I don't have much, I don't know him well. We have not dealt with each other that much. I wanted him to know about the consequence of his words. And I went to him and I said, you know, your message on social media showed the image of the man who killed my friend, potentially minutes before that happened. And your message was, this is what happens. You need to take responsibility and accountability for what you are saying and doing out there in the social media world. And I wanted him to hear that from me directly and not to, like, for me to tweet out at him. I think that is important, that he understands, again, the consequence of what the impact that his words have on people who are going through so much pain and trauma. This is not a joke.
Meanwhile, Trump told reporters that he wasn't going to call Minnesota Governor Tim Walz because it would be a waste of his time.
In Minnesota, there are a lot of horrific details that came out today about the suspect who's been charged there. Have you called the governor yet or been able to speak to any of them?
I don't know. I call him. He appointed this guy to a position. I think the governor of Minnesota is so whacked down. I'm not calling him. Why would I call him? I could call him and say, "Hi, how you doing?" The guy doesn't have a clue. So he's a mess. So, I could be nice to call him, but why waste time?
So Trump not calling Tim Walz, I don't care about that much. If he's going to call somebody, maybe he should call the families of the victims or something. That might be nice. I do, and I'm curious to see what you think. I did think the Mike Lee tweets were not good at all, given that, mostly just for the reason that they wrongly, now based on information we've learned subsequently, really attributed the blame here to Democrats or to the idea that this suspect was motivated by a pro-Democratic bias. It seems, if anything, to go the other way. Now, I'm always someone who says rhetoric is not responsible for violence. We don't, the perpetrator is the person responsible. Also, we are only beginning to understand what motivated this person and why he did what he did. But for Mike Lee to go straight to, and this is the Democrats' fault, be wrong about that, that seemed not good to me.
Yeah, I thought it was a bad look, and even just beyond the pinning it on Democrats, it was the joking manner that he took this really horrific assassination and assassination attempt with, And
he misspelled Walz's name, if that's what he was trying to do there. It was just, I don't know, it was not well thought out at all.
No, it wasn't great. I'd be curious to know what he said in response to Senator Smith after she brought up those concerns. And then there was an email that was put out that Smith's staff sent to Mike Lee as well, sort of criticizing him for mocking in the midst of their grief, which I thought was understandable. It's obviously a hard thing that they're going through. And you're right, there's a lot we still don't know about the suspect. There was information being spread initially that the state rep who was killed was one of the Democrats who flipped on a bill funding Medicare for illegal immigrants. But the other person who the suspect attempted to assassinate was not one of those individuals, voted for the bill to continue funding for illegal immigrants. Yes, he was appointed to a board by Tim Walz, but also, according to people who knew him, was a Republican who supported Trump. So it was way too early to be sort of trying to dunk on Democrats, I think.
Yeah, and apparently he has deleted those tweets. I saw that said on social media just before we started filming, and I looked and then I couldn't find them. So I think they have been deleted. And generally speaking, I think that was the right way for, like, Tina Smith to handle that was to just like go up to him and talk to him about it. Seemed somewhat mature for a member of Congress instead of just tweeting in response or only, having all of these confrontations always in public. The greater tendency to attribute when something bad like this happens to always say it's some political faction's fault or it's clearly linked to a political ideology is something members of the mainstream media and many Democrats succumb to all the time. And often, Republicans push back on that, but then when the shoe's on the other foot, it's really both sides are, almost in a very ghoulish and disgusting way. When something bad, violent happens, people like cross their fingers and hope they can chalk it up to their political enemies, which just seems totally wrong to me.
Yeah, and in this case, one of the weird things about this guy that people were sort of seizing on was the fact that he had this roommate who was like a pizza delivery driver, but he's also married and has a bunch of kids. And to me, that is even more of a suggestion that this guy was probably not super well and maybe not in the best circumstance and had devolved in some way, to the point where he would have a warped ideology, much like Luigi Mangione on the other side, in thinking that an assassination is going to solve his problems.
And what a creepy photo. It's
so
just,
creepy.
It's horrifying, and that's just a terrible thing to happen in general.
He was wearing like a silicone mask.
over his face. Yeah, it's...
I'm worried about those. I've seen some videos of the very hyper-realistic ones, and I think that those could become a serious problem over time in terms of identifying people who commit crimes.
Yikes. I do always like to remind everyone, though, these incidents become part of a narrative for how much more violent society is becoming, how much more political violence is. You might have seen there was a New York Times headline that was saying political violence, like school shootings, is now routine. And of course, neither political violence nor school shootings are actually routine. And the article doesn't have any evidence that they're becoming routine. At best, it says that threats against lawmakers were like slightly higher last year than the year before. Well, even that, and that's not good, but threats against lawmakers is not the same thing as actual violence against lawmakers. Media coverage makes it seem like these things are increasing, just like the school shootings, the vast majority of which are somebody pulls a gun after a football game or in the parking lot or something, not Parkland
shooting,
or Uvalde or something. Those things, which are horrifying, are extremely rare. They don't seem extremely rare because they're covered so exhaustively when they happen because they're horrifying incidents, but it's not like some uptick over time. And I suspect that's the same for politically motivated violence, which is the smallest category of violence imaginable, thankfully.
I think that's probably true. I mean, on the school shootings point, too, they also include like cases where there was like an accidental discharge or someone, God forbid, commits suicide in like a school parking lot. That's counted as a school shooting. So, they do some tricky manipulation of statistics to try to make these narratives seem realistic, but they're not.
Thanks for watching Free Media. We'll have more for you right after this.